Okay, let's start. Short title, right? Just follows through. It's very easy to say it. Trust but verify experimental innovations in AEM Assets. We're going to be talking about two experimental features. We have already started testing them with a few select customers. You can also, after this talk, if you are really interested in them, you can contact us and try to become a part of the project and help us develop them and figure out what needs to be done so that they actually reach your goals and achieve the requirements that you have from them. Let's quickly go over the agenda. We're going to be talking about trust and governance in AEM Assets and what our understanding about trust and governance is. It's not a topic that's easily, it's not something that you can easily define if we don't establish a common base ground. We're gonna be talking about why it's extremely important now, and I guess you probably guessed the answer by now, right? Some things have appeared on the internet. Some were funnier, some were not as funny. We're going to be obviously talking about the two feature previews. So the native malware scanning, which is more or less protecting your asset ingestion pipeline. Something that you used to have, or it was possible to implement on your own on-prem and potentially also on AMS, became a bit more difficult in cloud, next to impossible without support from the core. And then we're going to be talking about authenticity and provenance. So it's content traceability through invisible watermarking. We did have watermarking. It was not invisible. It was not necessarily for provenance or traceability. But now we have this feature in the pipeline as well. There's going to be a demo, which I pre-recorded because during my first presentation at adaptTo, something didn't work properly, and I didn't notice it, and it kind of ruined the demo experience. Also, it's obviously involving uploading assets. It's asynchronous with the processing, so I really wanted to avoid the dead times. I prefer to use that time to actually talk to you. And then there's going to be some key takeaways. What you can already start doing today, because what we're going to be providing through these two features doesn't really change your workflows, but it empowers you to have a safer DAM. So, trust and governance. What is it? Obviously, as the image suggests, it's about building trust. It's building trust with your customers. It's building trust within your own DAM. It's building trust within your own company, depending on the policies that you have for your own assets. So if we were to define it, it's a process that involves three things. You have to be sure that your assets are secure. That means that your upload pipeline is secure. It means that once you've finished uploading your assets are malware-free. And it means that the assets that you've been uploading, once they have reached your DAM, they are secured by access control. Meaning that you know exactly who can modify them, who can access them, and so on. It means that your assets are authentic. What does that mean? It means that we have a proven origin. So we know exactly who created them, how they came into existence, what alterations have been performed on them. It means that we can guarantee that they have not been tampered since creation. So nobody modified them without us knowing and seeing exactly the change that took place, when and how. And it means that the assets can be traced, right? We know exactly into which systems they've gone, where they have come from, and so on. And it's also the process of offering compliance, right? Your assets have to be compliant to your own internal rules, whether that is licensing or usage rights. It means that your assets have an audit trail and that there are processes to know exactly how your assets are being used live once they're published, once they've left your DAM. Sometimes that also happens. Why does it matter now? Well, in the age of deep fakes and AI, I think trust is not really optional. Trust is the most important currency you have right now. I'm not sure if you're religious or not, doesn't really matter. This was featured in the New York Times in 2023. Once one of the Gen AI models showed up, people started doing deep fakes. Some were funnier, some were not. Obviously, I'm not really sure that, I don't think that Pope Francis was a fashion icon, right? I don't think that Pope Francis ever showed up anywhere at any ceremony or in any kind of public appearance wearing Balenciaga. But a deep fake, if you're not really trained, if you don't really recognize the obvious signs, is convincing. So the models right now can produce a lot of information that can easily be thought as being true. If you're more curious about the article, is linked at the end of the slides. It's from New York Times, and it's one of those articles that can be accessed for free. So let's talk about trust and governance in AEM. But to do that, we have to understand how AEM as a cloud service works and what the assets architecture provides now. How is it different from on-prem? It's a relatively complex architecture. But I'm going to try to summarize it for you. The process right now regarding uploading happens with what we call the three-step upload process. So your assets get directly uploaded into the blob storage. The flow is that you initiate your upload request with AEM. AEM comes back with a set of assigned URLs to blob IDs where you can do the upload yourself. You might have to chunk your binaries, you perform the upload, and then once you're done with that upload, you tell AEM, hey, I'm done, you can start processing. At that point, AEM is going to obviously start processing those assets. Those binaries get associated to their parent node in the repository. And then asset compute kicks in, and it starts processing your assets, right? And I guess we're all familiar with asset compute by now. It has a set of core workers in runtime. There are workers that are provided out of the box by Adobe. You can have your own custom workers deployed in your own namespaces that can do additional work on the original assets. And the contract is that there's a source asset, the original, and the worker or the workers produce one or more additions, which are then processed into the DAM. I'm not sure how many of you had really sharp eyes or how good my diagram is, but there's one new thing here in this diagram. And it was easily missable, right? We already had request processing before, but now we introduce request pre-processing. So it's something that happens before the core workers get triggered. How does that work? Do you love those diagrams, these flow diagrams? Very geeky. So you start the pre-processing right after the upload. Obviously, your asset goes into an unprocessed state. And then, because it's an experimental feature, the processing can be enabled or disabled on the instance, depending on the program. If it is enabled, then we start the pre-processing operation. And the pre-processing operation can obviously be successful or not, like anything. If it's not successful, the question is, was the preprocessor that we were invoking retryable? If it is retryable, well, we're going to this loop. If it's not retryable, that means that stuff should really not go on. If the preprocessing failed, we end up in the process state, which is kind of not true, right? We haven't processed it, but to make sure that the asset shows properly in the DAM, we mark it as processed, and we end the preprocessing. If processing was successful, pre-processing was successful, obviously then we go into the processing phase where we start creating the renditions. And then this works in a very similar fashion. So now that we have the pre-processing available, let's talk about the two feature previews that I wanted to show you. Native malware scanning. A lot of customers really wanted to have malware scanning. It can be debated if it's useful or not. There are a lot of asset categories. Most of the asset categories that we see on the websites usually do not have malware. It's kind of impossible to embed malware into them. But there are a few of them, a tiny subclass of assets that could have malware or could have exploits or could have viruses. And those are the ones that can be directly executed by a browser. It could be SVGs. It could be files that have macros like Excel, Sheets, PDFs, and a few other ones. And although it's not something that you'd necessarily directly serve on your website, there is the potential that somebody from your organization or a partner downloads them and then corrupts their own machine, and then that machine interacts with your network. So obviously you can see that there is a relatively important vector attack, and there can be real consequences if those things would be unscanned and available on your network. If you had your AEM instance either as an Adobe Managed Services instance or on-prem, in 2019 or 18, I forgot, a long time ago when I was young, Oliver Litz introduced here at this conference 2 modules. Those were the Apache Sling Commons CLAM and Apache Sling CLAM, and they're called like that because they were using ClamAV, which is an open source malware protection solution. CLAM has 2 components. There's a daemon that usually does the scanning. There's a client that sends stuff to the daemon. But then there's also an option in between where you don't run either of them. It's just one process that scans the whole thing. The implementation, I think, didn't really care about how you were doing it as long as you were tying it into the CLAM product. In AMS, so in managed services, on top of that, because those instances that you have are actually running in AWS, there's HIDS, so the host-based intrusion detection systems, which are deployed on absolutely every server that AMS offers. And they obviously scan whatever files are modified, try to look for signatures, for non-signatures to detect malware, viruses, and so on. Obviously, on cloud service, everything is based on containers, and that becomes really difficult, right? There's no real file system anymore that's available for your assets. They're in a blob. Everything is abstracted. Locally, you don't really have storage that you can really work with. So that made it next to impossible to have malware scanning, or at least not something that I could have implemented without any support out of the box. Luckily, now we have this pre-processing framework. So if we look at the diagram, right, it's more or less an example of how a preprocessor works in this diagram. Again, we go to the unprocessed state. Is malware scanning enabled? Yes. Then we start scanning the binary. Is scanning successful? If yes, we continue the preprocessing or processing depending on what preprocessors were registered in the framework. If not, it's kind of obvious what should happen, right? It's a short circuit preprocessor. If this one failed, we stop absolutely everything. The assets are going to go into quarantine. I guess you're very familiar with the concept. I don't really have to explain it. But depending on how many assets you might be uploading, we didn't really want those assets to go directly into a quarantine folder because it can explode, right? If you have, I don't know, hundreds of uploads per day, it's going to become unbearable, even assuming you would have a 0.1% infected assets. So then there's another bucket that gets created there that makes it a bit easier to find what was quarantined and has that pattern, so it's a year-month folder. The quarantine folder is out-of-the-box protected with ACLs, so only authorized users can see what's there. Out of the box, I think it's the administrators group. Obviously, you can configure the ACLs yourself, so it depends on your own organization and policies who should have access there. It's based on ClamAV, like before, so this doesn't really change, but you don't directly interact with any API to do this. Everything happens automatically for you. Once the asset is in quarantine, there are only 2 actions that can be performed right now, which are also obvious: delete or on quarantine. It was a false positive, so you want to actually resume using that asset. I think it's also possible from that folder to actually download the asset. You should obviously not download it on your own local machine. Provide a container where you can actually test what's happening with that asset in case you have doubts. Let's talk about the more important feature, in my opinion, which is the invisible watermarking. You cannot talk about the invisible watermarking without understanding its purpose. Why is it there, what it tries to offer, and how it's all tied together. So we have to talk a bit about authenticity and provenance. A few years back, Adobe started the Content Authenticity Initiative. But it didn't start alone. It brought a lot of partners interested in authenticity and provenance. I'm going to give you a few names. The British Broadcasting Corporation, so the BBC. Leica, you've heard about it if you're into photography. Nikon, you heard about it if you're maybe an amateur photographer or a professional. And a few more partners have joined. Right now, there are around 5,000 of them. The latest ones who have joined are Samsung and Google. And they've joined that with their mobile phones. I think S25 from Samsung supports content credentials out of the box, and the latest Google Pixel, maybe. I'm an Apple guy, so I don't really know, but I read about that. What I can tell you about the Samsung one is that they didn't really make a smart implementation. They only add content credentials to the photos you take. If you use their feature to modify the photo that you took with Gen AI, which is kind of beyond the purpose because authenticity doesn't have to be guaranteed only for Gen AI generated assets. It should be guaranteed for absolutely every asset that's out. So the CAI came with a standard. We like acronyms and easily to understand concepts. So the standard is called C2PA Content Credentials, and C2PA stands for Coalition for Content Provenance and Authenticity. And the standard provides some very important information to guarantee authenticity and provenance. Who created the asset, when and how it was created, right? It was created with a camera, or it was completely done in a photo editing software or in a vector editing software, and what edits or transformations were made. And all of them become a chain of records, and this manifest has two forms. It can be directly embedded into the binary for the binary files that support this, or it can be next to the file in a separate file that describes the manifest, and it can also be uploaded to the cloud. There's a content authenticity cloud. We're going to see it in the demo. This manifest is encrypted, so any alteration you would try to do to the asset would break the trust, because then the manifest itself would not be verifiable anymore. So you can see how this ties everything together. Now, if you think about provenance, and what can offer provenance to an asset, there are these three concepts. Metadata, which we already knew. Fingerprinting, which we also knew. And watermarking, which we knew, but not in the shape that we have it right now. So we knew it as a normal watermark, a symbol that gets on top of your photo, and it doesn't really provide any of those guarantees. But if you look at the three pillars of provenance and you consider the watermark to be the invisible watermark, you see how none of them fully fulfills the requirements for offering provenance. So it's kind of like one of those three-legged stools, or a hocker in German, I think it's called, right? If one of the feet is broken, you cannot really sit on it without doing a balancing act. And nobody wants to do a balancing act with trust. This is based on a research paper from one of our colleagues. It's linked, so you can read more about it to understand the whole thing about what hard biting means and resilience to legacy platform stripping, although that you're going to see in the demo, and all kind of spoofing deterministic lookup. It's a research paper, so I'm not going to try to summarize it in a minute because it wouldn't be fair. But you see how all of those three together provide you the provenance guarantee. So let's talk about the invisible watermarking. As part of the C2PA standard, in the C2PA standard, there's an action called C2PA watermarked. It's based on a TrustMark algorithm, which is also documented in the resources section. And this one is based on a GAN-based watermarking solution. GAN means generative adversarial network. What that means is that they have two neural networks fighting against each other. One tries to produce a watermark, one tries to attack the watermark, and they train them until the one that produces the watermark cannot be actually beaten anymore by the one that tries to attack the watermark. It's very robust and imperceptible. Robust means that you can throw at it an asset no matter the size. It's still going to be able to produce a watermark in a relatively fast amount of time. And it's imperceptible, meaning that the watermark that we apply to the asset is not going to change the way that we perceive the asset. It's an old concept. If you study computer science, you probably had a course about this. In second or third year, it's usually done as steganography, which means that you're hiding secret information in plain sight. You can do that in a lot of information. You can do it with image. You can do it with sound. There are tons of options to do it. You can do it with frequencies. It's absolutely crazy what you can do with it. An invisible watermark is very important because it becomes essential for copyright enforcement, for misinformation, and responsible Gen AI usage, tracking provenance, and so on. So again, it runs as a preprocessor, more or less the same flow, except that the watermarking is not a short-circuit one. If we're able to watermark the asset, fine. If not, it's also fine. Not everything can be watermarked. Right now, only JPEGs and PNGs can be watermarked. Use cases. It depends where you're working, right? Media and journalism, You want verifiable proof of authenticity. You want to make sure that what you've published is actually exactly what you wanted to publish. Provides protection against manipulated content, so nobody can take your published asset, process it, and make it look like something else. If you're in the brand and marketing business, it confirms that your campaign visuals are genuine, right? And it's very rare that the DAM is going to be serving your assets on various platforms, right? If you upload something on Facebook or any other social networks, the asset is outside of your DAM, is outside of your control. You get a report back about the campaign that has happened and the reach and so on. You cannot really track it yourself without using their platform. That's why they charge you money. And obviously with a watermark, you can track the provenance even across agencies. Sometimes the agencies don't work with your DAM either. In our case, most likely from what we've heard from customers because of licensing costs. So you can use the watermark to do that. If you're into the compliance and audit business, you can have a verifiable custody chain for your assets. And you can enable digital trails with the help of DRM, right? Watermarking itself or C2P itself is not going to do that for you, but you can combine it with other technologies and obtain this. So demo is recorded. I'm going to be more or less like a football or soccer commentator, but you're going to see what's happening and I'm going to explain the process. Let's hope that this works. It's in Touch UI for now. We're going to be working to bring it to Assets View as well. So I have a folder, AdaptTo 2025, in which I'm going to be uploading some assets. One of them is an image. I'm going to start a cultural war. Who knows about raclette and its origins? We're going to figure out if it's Swiss or French. And then I'm going to upload a set of malware files. They're not real malware. They are test files. They contain a signature that most of the antivirus solutions recognize is the AECAR standard malware file that you use to test your malware solution and detection system. So we uploaded them. You see that now they're in the pre-processing phase, so everything is going to be happening behind the scenes. Right now, I'm going to be taking this asset that I've also uploaded to the DAM, and I'm trying to verify if it has any content credentials. The asset comes from Wikipedia. I'm allowed to modify it. I'm allowed to use it. Obviously, it doesn't have content credentials. Now we're going to go back to the DAM, and if you have sharp eyes, you're going to see that from time to time, TouchUI doesn't have a live polling feature, the number of assets in that folder keeps shrinking. And that's because some of them get quarantined. So they moved out into quarantine. You're not going to see them anymore here. And we're actually going to go to the quarantine folder, and you're going to see how some of them start showing up there. Again, the bucket folder that I told you about. We're going to see now 3 assets. And the actions that we can perform right now directly on them are unquarantine and delete. If we unquarantine it, we bring it back to the original folder where it was uploaded. And we still have the metadata on it to know exactly that it has been scanned, that it has been detected to contain this and that malware signature and so on. So you still have that information available. Now, we're slowly going to go back to our folder. And right now, the asset has been processed or is in the processing phase. But if it's in the processing phase, we already know that the upload has completed, right? And that at least the original, if not the renditions as well, have the content credentials now added to them and the watermarking. Obviously, if you already had an asset that had content credentials, we're not going to re-sign it. If it had a watermark, we're not going to touch it. So if you were already working with these features, everything's going to stay the same. So I've downloaded the asset, and now the content credentials are embedded into the binary itself. This is the original asset, a guy preparing a raclette in a Swiss cable car in Grindelwald. And you see the difference, right, between the watermarked one and the original. For the eye, there is an imperceptible difference. The difference in size is 0.1 megabytes, and that's the rendition that we had for malware, the ClamAV scan report. It's an implementation detail, you don't really have to care about it. Everything else is in the asset metadata. So now we're going to verify the content credentials that we've generated for this asset. There is this content authenticity website from Adobe where you can do that. And you see all the details, right? Adobe Experience Manager was used for signing. It's a watermarked asset. And now I've uploaded a rendition. And you see how the rendition links you back to the original. So you have the provenance information. So now we're going to take this asset, bring it into Preview. Preview has no idea about content credentials. So this is the platform stripping that we were talking about earlier. I'm going to even resize it. And I'm going to convert it from a JPEG to a PNG. So right now, metadata is completely gone from it. The manifest as well. Also different encoding. And I'm going to save it. And this is where we start a cultural wall. We're going to rename it Raclette France. Yes, finally. Going back to the origin. Any Swiss guys here? I think Roman is Swiss. So now we take this PNG, right? You see it's tinier. It's obviously lossless, but it's based on the JPEG. And we're going to go to the Authenticity Cloud to figure out if it has any credentials. No, credentials are completely gone because of the platform stripping. So we're now going to look for possible matches. And we actually see that their renditions are very similar to this one. And that's based on the watermarking and the size that the actual asset that we've uploaded now, the PNG, has. So we figure out, oh, OK, so this is somehow related. So now I'm using my friend for a nice forgery, the best forgery there is. If it could only give me free money, it would be amazing. I'm taking this image to Gemini. And I'm asking it to complete the setup for the cultural war. I'm going to remove all Swiss flags, all logos. I paid attention where there are Swiss symbols, right? There's one on the collar of the jacket. It's a tiny section of the cross. And I'm going to add a French flag. This is going to make it authentic. Definitely, right? The French also have their Alps. They're also just as nice, a bit cheaper than the Swiss ones. Food sometimes nicer in France. So I got my stuff, right? You see that it has the watermark there in the right corner. There's the typical watermark that you were familiar with, but it doesn't mean anything, right? I could change that, remove that easily with Photoshop. I could do whatever with it. So I'm going to bring it back to the Content Authenticity Cloud and try to verify it. And you would expect that Google, because they joined the partnership, they would actually put content credentials into their generated assets with Gemini. Let's figure out if they do that. They don't? Oh, OK. Let's figure out if there's any possible match for this asset after it's been converted to a PNG and then sent to Gemini to start my cultural war about raclette. And we figure out that this one is actually a derived one, and that derived one is actually has all the Swiss symbols because raclette is Swiss. French guys, stop saying that raclette is French. So that's more or less the end of the demo. Now you see actually in this folder the asset that came back to the quarantine and how from the quarantine and how all the other assets are in the quarantine folder. So in the interest of time, I'm going to skip this. There are like 10 seconds or 15 seconds more, but you see the assets. Key takeaways, because I want to have a bit of time for questions, right? So trust and governance is foundational, right? It's becoming a very important feature to have now with Gen AI all over the place, especially now that it's so easy to produce deepfakes and automation to produce those deepfakes. The security is shifting left. What does it mean? It means that now we have a secured asset upload pipeline, and we do the upload check exactly there where it matters, right? We do not wait for the asset to come to your DAM. We do that way before. Authenticity matters, right? It's the C2PA stuff that I showed you. There's a huge standard. I actually encourage you to read it. It's quite important. There's also a short presentation of the standard so you can understand without having to read a specification. But invisible watermarking can help you verify now, right? You see the whole provenance and doesn't really disrupt your workflows, is there, doesn't change absolutely anything for the way that you used to be working with it. And the call to action is get ready now, right? The two features that we're going to start bringing into the product don't really change your workflows, which means that your workflows actually should only adapt for the times that we live in. The tooling doesn't force you to do absolutely anything in any direction. If you're really interested in testing those two features, you can send us an email there. That's an actual distribution list for my team, the Trust and Governance team inside Assets. I have all the PMs there, all the engineering, so we're really curious about your feedback, and especially if you'd be interested to experiment with us. And with that, thank you very much for your time and attention. Sorry that I've been talking so fast. Questions?
Thank you, Radu, for clarifying the raclette case, that it's actually Swiss. So people actually learned something important at adaptTo. Yeah, first question. Will dynamic media preserve the watermarks?
Yes. The watermark is embedded into the pixels. So let me have a sip of water.
Sure.
The watermark, if I remember correctly, is a series of 64 bytes that we get back from a service. Those bytes, then we add into the content credentials manifest, which is a JSON file that gets encrypted into the metadata section of the binary. And then there's also a bit of encoding in the pixels. The algorithm is resilient, right? What I told you before, and you saw the modifications that I performed. Dynamic media would also perform more or less the same modifications. As long as we have at least 80% of the original material in the asset, we can still recover the watermark. And it's a very fast process, and it's deterministic. So dynamic media renditions, the same as we had the other renditions in the DAM, are going to preserve the watermark.
All right. How do you handle the situation uploading malware which is not detected by today's signature, but maybe we would be detected in the future signature? Do you do like a regular rescan of the entire DAM?
Do you remember that email address that I told you about? Hit that question there, and we can start implementing. We thought about it. It's something that we have on the backlog. We just have to figure out how it is the most cost-effective way of implementing that, because it's kind of expensive to scan everything, especially knowing that there are a lot of binaries there in your DAM that cannot have malware.
Mehdi wants to know, as in his understanding, this is only putting watermarks. What about reading some existing watermark during the upload too?
That's something I told you about. So if your asset already had content credentials, we're not going to assign it. The flow is, I didn't want to include that state diagram as well, but there's also an algorithm for how we apply the watermark. We get the asset and we figure out, does it have a manifest in it? It's a binary one. Okay. Does it have a watermark? No. Okay, so if it doesn't have a watermark, we actually generate the watermark and then we apply the action, right? So it's already tracking a change that happens to your asset. It's another action that comes on top. And then we create a new asset based on your original. Your original one becomes an ingredient, and I'm sorry, I have to use the lingo from the C2PA spec, otherwise I would not be doing fair by them. So then we create a generative asset from it. The original one is a parent, and you have the whole thing. There's also another use case where the asset could not have the manifest anymore in it for some weird reason, and it has been watermarked, in which case we try to retrieve the watermark from the content authenticity cloud and then bring it back into the binary and then make it in such a way that the watermark becomes, again, part of the binary manifest and uploaded. But this is not a transformation, it's just recovering the manifest.
Thank you, Radu. It was absolutely great to have you on stage for your 11th talk.
Thank you very much.